Welcome to Soul via Soul, the podcast where we embark on a journey of self-love and true wellness. I'm your host, Jada, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here with me as we dive into all things mind, body, and soul. Now, what do you say we get this thing started? Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of Soul via Soul. Today, we're going to talk about the complex mind-body healing of trauma. And I say mind-body healing because my experience as a person who sat on the other side of the couch, as well as my experience in training as a therapist, has led me to come to the understanding that healing is a mind-body approach. And we're going to take a little stroll down understanding the three brains that we have. And that may come as a shocker because I'm sure everyone who's listening knows quite well about the first brain, the central nervous system. But there's also our second brain, which is the gut-brain axis. And then there's the third brain, which is emerging research on the heart-brain axis, which is why, especially when we are healing, and healing is going to obviously be on every level, emotionally, physically, psychologically, energetically, we have to understand and include all parts of us. That's how we get to wellness, is when there is healing in all parts of our systems. So without getting too sciencey, I do think it's important to understand the fundamental workings of how this is all interconnected. Because it's one thing to say mind body and not have any real idea of what that means. So we're going to take a little stroll through the body, touching and greeting and meeting and having a little conversation with the three brains as we learn how important it is in our healing process about integration. So let's start with the top of our head, our central nervous system. Most people are pretty aware that we have a central nervous system, which includes our brain and our spinal cord. However, the brain, most of us think as the command center of our nervous system, and it is responsible for processing sensory information, making decisions, and controlling bodily functions. It's kind of a no-brainer. Most people get that. And it is divided into various regions of the brain, and they serve different functions. The cerebral cortex, for example, is involved in our cognitive higher functioning. The cerebellum for coordination, the brainstem for basic life functionings like breathing and heartbeat regulation. Now, the spinal cord is a long cylindrical bundle of nerve fibers that run down our spinal column, which are the bones that include or encase the spinal column. Again, without getting too bogged down in the science, it's important to understand that this is how the body and the brain communicate to the rest of the body. So this spinal column has all these little nerves that come out from it that branch out, and they serve as a relay between the brain and the peripheral nervous system. So what's the peripheral nervous system, you ask? Well, I'm so glad you did. The peripheral nervous system are actually all the nerve cells and their associated structures located outside the CNS. So the CNS basically is our brain and our spinal column. Everything outside of that communicates with our brain is considered the peripheral nervous system, which makes sense. One's right in the center of our core and the others are on the periphery. So that usually makes sense to most people. Now, the peripheral nervous system is further divided into two systems. The somatic nervous system, which is related to our body. The word soma means body. And then the autonomic nervous system. And this controls the involuntary actions of the body. Things that happen like when we breathe. So the somatic nervous system controls voluntary movement and sensory perception. It enables you to interact with your environment consciously. So this allows you to move, and the sensory neurons give you information that takes it to your brain. Like, what do you see? What do you touch? What do you smell? All of those senses put information up to the brain, which then interprets them. The autonomic nervous system controls functions of the body, such as heart rate, digestion, and breathing. Now, to make things a little more complicated, that autonomic nervous system, which has its role in the things that are outside of our conscious control, is further divided into two other nervous systems, which most people are familiar with: sympathetic and parasympathetic. And we talk a lot about this in healing because sympathetic nervous system is our activating fight or flight response. It's our danger, run for the hills, or freeze. It keeps us and has kept us safe for generations. It's why we're alive to some degree, because it keeps us out of danger. The parasympathetic nervous system is the chill out, calm, everything's good, rest and digest system. It promotes relaxation and recovery, slows down the heart rate, stimulates digestion, and conserves energy. And you can see how you would want these in balance. Like, sometimes you need to run, but then after you run, you're going to need to rest. So there is this balance between these two systems. Now, obviously, people get out of balance and they get stuck in chronic sympathetic activation, which is not good, and that leads to chronic illness. So the nervous system operates through a series of electrical signals called nerve impulses or action potentials. And again, not to get too sciencey, but they communicate by jumping these synapses like electricity and communicate along nerve fibers. So it's important to understand that this is the basic functioning of our body. This is how we sense and know where we are in the world and how we receive information. But now let's talk about the second brain. The second brain is the gut-brain axis. Some of you have heard of this and have some fundamental knowledge of the gut-brain axis. What I think is really cool about the gut-brain axis is it's bidirectional. We used to think that the central nervous system, brain, spinal cord, what we just learned about, told the gut what to do. We now know that it's actually bidirectional, and there's constant communication between the gut and the brain. Furthermore, this communication is also facilitated through multiple pathways that allow the gut and the nervous system to exchange information and, what's really cool, influence one another. So here's how the gut talks to the nervous system. And there's more fibers going from the gut to the brain than vice versa. So the enteric nervous system has its own nervous system, which is actually really cool. And you think about it when you have butterflies in your tummy or you get so nervous that you vomit, which has happened to me before when I was, well, that's another story. So you can understand how when you feel things in your gut, there's a whole thing that happens from emotions. So the enteric nervous system is also called the second brain because it can function independently of the central nervous system. You can feel intense emotion and have a reaction that has nothing to do with your brain. Now, there's another really important nerve that we need to talk about, and that is the vagus nerve. Now, the vagus nerve is a very large nerve, and it's known as cranial nerve 10. And it plays a crucial role in connecting the gut and the brain. The vagus nerve carries sensory information from the gut to the brain. It is responsible for regulating various gastrointestinal functioning, including the movement of food through our digestive tract. And it releases digestive enzymes. The gut also produces hormones. These hormones influence the brain and nervous system. For example, hormone serotonin And all the neurotransmitters, dopamine, norepinephrine, that our brain needs are made in our gut. So having a healthy gut is super important for mental health. Again, this bidirectional body-mind connection, like we just can't get away from it. And the science shows us that we can't. And then there's what I think is the coolest part of it is the microbiota gut-brain communication. So let me explain that word. Microbiota is just a fancy name for all the microorganisms that live in our gut. They're collectively known as the microbiota. Now, what's really cool about this is emerging research suggests that the gut microbiome can produce neurotransmitters and metabolites that influence the function of the enteric nervous system and communicates with the central nervous system. Basically, the bacteria in your gut have a little conversation with your brain. Now, that's just cool. It's so cool. I actually wrote an ebook about it. It's called The Gut Reset, and it shows you how changing your diet actually improves and influences your brain health. And this is a little side note. It's actually the bacteria in your gut that drives food cravings. So if you're craving sugar, that's the first sign that you have a gut imbalance, because the bad bacteria love sugar, but the good bacteria love fiber. So if you're craving sugar all the time to check out the gut reset, because we want to switch that into more healthy gut microorganisms. So let's talk about the third brain. The third brain is the heart-brain axis, and this is probably the most exciting. This is the newest part of the research. And again, what's really cool about this research is that it's bidirectional. The heart has 5 times more electromagnetic energy than our brain. The bidirectional communication between our heart and our brain is something that's, again, new and emerging. But what we've discovered is that the brain and the heart are also connected by neural pathways. The autonomic nervous system, remember that's the one that just does things on its own, plays a central role in regulating heart function. Makes sense. Our heart beats when we sleep. The sympathetic nervous system can increase the heart rate and contractility of the heart, while the parasympathetic nervous system can slow the heart rate down. Now, these are just biological functions between body and mind. And the vagus nerve, which is part of the peripheral nervous system, also interprets and transmits signals from the brain to the heart. So, emotions and stress. How does all this connect when we have emotions and stress in our body? So, emotions and stress also have a profound impact on the heart. And I think everybody would resonate with that. We can all remember when our heart has been broken and how that feels. I mean, our body just shuts down. The brain, specifically the limbic system in the brain, is responsible for processing emotions and stress. Emotional states like anxiety and anger can trigger the release of stress hormones, such as cortisol and adrenaline. That can affect heart rate and blood pressure. Chronic stress, as we've talked about before, can increase the risk of heart disease because it keeps those cortisol levels high, which we don't want. We want to run from the scary bear, but we don't want to always feel like we're running from the scary bear. The heart also plays a role in hormonal regulation and psychosocial factors. So the psychosocial factors, such as depression, anxiety, and social support, can also affect the brain and the heart. Depression is associated with an increased risk of heart disease, and social support can have a protective effect on our heart health. Again, mind, body connection. So, how is the nervous system connected to our emotions? The nervous system is intricately connected to our emotions because emotions are complex. They're multifactorial psychosocial and psychological states that involve a wide range of feelings and bodily responses. The nervous system, particularly the brain, plays a central role in processing and regulating these emotions. That's how they are connected. Now, they're stored in different regions of the brain, and the neurotransmitters also play a part in how they're stored. But how does all this affect healing when it comes to trauma? So, how does the body interpret trauma? The body interprets trauma through a complex interplay of physiological, psychological, and neurobiological processes, which then lends itself to the understanding that if we're going to heal trauma, we have to incorporate all of these pieces. Trauma, especially when it is prolonged, can have a profound impact on the various systems of the body. And it can leave us having unhealthy coping mechanisms, such as a constant stress response where we always feel like we're in fight or flight. It can lead to neurobiological changes in the brain and actually make us difficult to interpret our emotions correctly. We stay in this high emotional reactivity of fear. We can sometimes have difficulty with memory loss, dissociation, hyperarousal, hypervigilance. Physical symptoms can also manifest by trauma, such as headaches, GI issues, and chronic pain. Again, mind-body connection. So there's also obviously the emotional and the psychological effects that can lead to anxiety disorders, depression, PTSD, things like that, which also leave us feeling with negative emotions that we continue to struggle with, like guilt, shame, and self-blame. Obviously, this is going to also impact your relationships. So how do we heal? How do we heal after trauma? Because we see and know that trauma has impacts on all of our systems, how do we actually heal? And to me, healing the nervous system after trauma, and again, I've talked about trauma in other podcasts about there's really not that much of a difference between big T and little t traumas to our body because they both leave psychological and physical impressions. But healing typically involves a combination of self-care practices that need to incorporate mind and body, therapeutic interventions, and sometimes professional support. It can have an impact on our nervous system, leading to symptoms like we've said, anxiety and depression. So how do we get through this? How do we actually heal trauma through the body? And that's part of exactly why I've created my courses and my membership, is to give people tools and resources to know that there are ways to move through this that you can do on your own. Obviously, having a guide is helpful, and sometimes you need more support than what I or someone online can help you with. But there are things you can do to help move you through trauma. One of the things you can do is learn how to use mindfulness and relaxation techniques, meditation, relaxation, body work such as yoga, even just running or walking. Giving your body permission to experience and express these big emotions are important. And now that we know the mind-body connection, we also need to understand how important our nutrition is to help our gut, to help our mind, to help heal the trauma. How important sleep is to help heal our gut, which heals our mind, which heals the trauma. Having those social supports, having someone to walk alongside you and be witness to and help you move through the trauma. Grounding techniques, walking barefoot on the earth is one of my favorite. I've always been a tree hugger, to be honest. Giving yourself permission to let these emotions calm through your body, and also having an incredible amount of self-compassion. Another wonderful way to allow the movement of emotions is journaling. We don't think of journaling as being like this big body experience, but the act of moving your pen across paper moves your emotions. It can be tremendously helpful in allowing you the expression of moving your emotions out. All of these are tools and techniques that give us a basic fundamental understanding, I hope, in the science behind why we need to approach therapy and trauma healing specifically through the lens of incorporating and integrating this mind-body approach. Because as we can see from the science, it's actually all connected. Thank you for joining me today for this edition of the Soul via Soul podcast. I hope you found it helpful. Obviously, if you find this material helpful for you, awesome, like and subscribe. And if you think someone else could benefit from hearing this message, please share the podcast. I've created these courses and this podcast so that we can all move our journey along in healing. I have courses and other resources available on my website. I have a free newsletter that you can join that also keeps you up to date on tips that you can use to move your life forward so that we can all get on the business of feeling